This is an outrage. She gets everything.
Yeah. Father, how could you?
You manipulated him.
Billionaire last dying wish to see the old black maid. What happened changed everything. The hospital's sharp antiseptic smell couldn't mask the raw desperation in his trembling whisper, barely rising above the monitor's relentless beep. "Find Miss Clara, my last wish." Those words, heavy with a lifetime of buried regrets, promised to unravel everything and pull you into a story that would change it all. Welcome back, my faithful family. Today I have a deep story to share with you if you would agree to stay till the end. Will you? Now before we continue, please subscribe. Thanks. The penthouse, a dizzying eyrie atop a Manhattan skyscraper, was a monument to Sterling Thorne's ruthless ambition. Walls of glass offered panoramic views of a city that never slept, a city Sterling had, in his prime, bent to his will. Now he lay amidst this stark opulence, a fragile husk on sheets of silk. His breath shallow, each inhale a silent testament to his fading grip on life. The air, filtered and climate-controlled, held the faint, clinical tang of antiseptic, a stark counterpoint to the vibrant chaos of the metropolis below. At 82, Sterling had forged an empire, Thorne Industries, a behemoth in global finance. His name commanded respect, fear, and admiration in equal measure. But in this final chapter, stripped of his custom-tailored suits and his formidable presence, he was merely a dying man. His eyes, once piercing and calculating, now held a deep, unsettling weariness, reflecting nothing but the muted television screen above. He hadn't truly seen anything with his heart in decades, not in the way that genuinely mattered. His two children, Bryce and Tiffany, drifted in and out of his periphery. Bryce, a man whose expensive suits couldn't quite hide the jittery energy of a perennial gambler, spoke in clipped tones to the legal team. Tiffany, her designer sunglasses perpetually perched on her head, her laugh too loud, too frequent for the solemnity of a deathbed, fidgeted with her phone, occasionally pausing to take a call that reeked of fleeting, frivolous engagements. They discussed medical reports and asset allocations, their concern a thin veneer over their anticipation. Sterling heard them, every word. His mind, though his body was failing, remained razor-sharp. He knew their anxieties weren't about his impending death, but about the vast fortune poised for inheritance, a fortune he increasingly believed they were ill-equipped and undeserving to manage. Their lavish spending, their reckless indulgences, and their complete disinterest in the painstaking machinery of Thorne Industries had become a gnawing burden in his final days. The thought of his life's work dissolving in a haze of drugs and bad investments filled him with a cold dread. One afternoon, as the sterile quiet pressed in, a specific memory, sharp and vivid, pierced through the fog of pain medication. It wasn't of a hostile takeover or a record-breaking IPO. It was the scent of coconut oil and a faint, sweet aroma of plantains, the lilting sound of a Jamaican accent singing a lullaby, the feeling of strong, comforting hands brushing his hair. A name, long suppressed, fought its way to the forefront of his failing consciousness. "Miss Clara," he rasped, the sound a dry, desperate whisper. The attending nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, leaned closer. "Mr. Thorne, did you say something?" Sterling gathered a surprising surge of strength, his eyes, for the first time in weeks, locking onto hers with an almost fierce urgency. "Find Clara Johnson. Tell her it's my last wish." The words were an order, a plea, and a confession all at once. Sarah, startled by the sudden vitality in his voice, could only nod, jotting down the name, wondering who this mysterious Miss Clara could be, and why her name was only now being uttered with such profound desperation.
The ripple of that simple command spread through the penthouse, a discordant note in the symphony of Sterling Thorne's carefully constructed demise. What do you believe is the greatest legacy a person can leave behind? Wealth or the impact they have on others? Share your thoughts below.
Miles away, in a vibrant, close-knit Jamaican-American community in Queens, New York, Clara Johnson moved with the unwavering strength of a woman who had built her life with grit and grace. Her house, though modest, was a riot of color and life, reflecting the warmth of her Jamaican heritage. Framed photos of her children and grandchildren adorned every surface, and the air was perpetually rich with the scent of thyme, pimento, and fresh coffee. Reggae music, soft and melodic, often hummed from a small radio in the kitchen. Clara, at 75, was a matriarch. Her hands, calloused and strong, still moved with purposeful dexterity as she tended her small herb garden in the backyard, each plant a testament to her nurturing spirit. Her skin, the color of rich mahogany, was etched with the lines of laughter, hard work, and the wisdom accumulated over a lifetime. Her silver hair, often braided or wrapped in a colorful scarf, framed a face that held both a deep well of kindness and an almost unshakable resilience. She had seen much, understood more, and offered judgment only when absolutely necessary. Her firstborn son, Michael, an economics graduate, visited almost daily after finishing his work as a financial analyst. He'd arrive, often still in his crisp shirt and tie, to help his mother with chores, fix a leaky faucet, or simply share a cup of strong Jamaican coffee and conversation. Michael, with his sharp mind and quiet competence, often found himself reflecting on the times his mother, during her years working for the Thornes, would ask him to look over some of Sterling's convoluted financial documents. There were a handful of occasions, during his college years and even after, when Clara, concerned about a problem Sterling mentioned, would discreetly pass on snippets of information or ask him to explain complex market trends. Michael, always eager to help his mother, had in turn offered insightful observations and even direct solutions, which, unbeknownst to him, Sterling Thorne had implemented to resolve several thorny corporate issues, sometimes even making him a fortune. Sterling had never acknowledged these contributions directly, but he knew where the insights had come from. Clara had worked for the Thorne family for nearly 50 years, from the time Sterling was a restless boy until he became the formidable, emotionally distant man he was. She had served as nanny, housekeeper, and in many unspoken ways, the emotional compass of a household often adrift in its own opulence. She had loved him, in her own quiet way, with the fierce protectiveness only a surrogate mother could feel, even as he grew away from her, swallowed by the demands of his birthright and the relentless pursuit of wealth. After Sterling's parents passed and his own children were grown, he had retired Clara with a generous pension, a final, impersonal gesture that spoke volumes about the chasm that had grown between them. She had accepted it with her usual quiet dignity, harboring no bitterness, only a faint, lingering ache for the boy she once knew. She had built a fulfilling life since then, dedicated to her church, her family, and the simple pleasures of her garden. Her days were full, not with the frantic pace of the wealthy, but with the steady, grounding rhythm of genuine connection. The insistent ringing of her old-fashioned landline, usually reserved for calls from her daughter or a church friend, pulled her from her gardening. She picked it up, her brow furrowing slightly at the unfamiliar 212 area code. "Clara Johnson?" a polite, somewhat nervous female voice asked. "Speakin', darlin'. This is Sarah, a nurse for Mr. Sterling Thorne." Clara's breath hitched, a faint tremor running through her. Sterling Thorne. The name, unsaid for so long, felt heavy, a ghost from a past she had meticulously packed away. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice, though steady, held a deeper resonance. "Yes, he's asking for you, Miss Johnson. It's his last wish. He's not doing well." A cascade of complex emotions washed over Clara: surprise, a flicker of an old concern, and a deep, familiar weariness. After all these years, after all that distance, he was asking for her. The request was clear, urgent, and undeniably an echo of a connection she thought had been severed forever. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that whatever Sterling Thorne wanted to say, whatever secrets he needed to unburden, it would change everything. Not just for him, but for her, and perhaps even for her son Michael, whose quiet contributions had long gone unacknowledged. The past was calling, and she knew she had to answer. She just didn't know if she was ready for what it would reveal. The Thorne penthouse, usually a fortress against the outside world, felt strangely permeable as Clara stepped out of the private elevator. The journey up had been a blur of polished chrome and hushed luxury, each floor a silent ascent into a different realm. A nervous young assistant met her, guiding her through corridors that stretched like sterile arteries, past rooms filled with art that cost more than her entire neighborhood. The air was cool, almost frigid, a stark contrast to the humid, spice-laced warmth of her own home. She caught a fleeting glimpse of Bryce and Tiffany in a lounge area, their faces a mixture of confusion and thinly veiled annoyance as they watched her pass, their whispers like static in the periphery. Her heart, usually a steady drum, now beat with an unfamiliar rhythm, a mix of apprehension and a strange, deep-seated ache. It had been decades since she had last seen Sterling Thorne, not as a frail, dying man, but as a robust, albeit emotionally distant, patriarch. The scent of antiseptic intensified as they neared his suite, mingling with something else she couldn't quite place. Perhaps the faint, metallic tang of fear, or simply the absence of true life. The door swished open silently, revealing a vast room dominated by a hospital bed that seemed unnaturally stark against the opulent backdrop of silk draperies and antique furniture. Sterling Thorne lay there, a shadow of the man she remembered. His skin, once ruddy with power, was now translucent, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. His eyes, though still intense, held a vulnerability she had never seen before, a raw, unshielded fear that cut through the years of separation. Clara's gaze swept over the room, taking in every detail: the intricate Persian rug, the intimidating medical equipment, the distant hum of monitors. This was the landscape of his end, a gilded cage he had built for himself. Her eyes finally settled on Sterling, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty, it was heavy, laden with unspoken history, with regrets both acknowledged and unacknowledged, with the phantom echoes of laughter and quiet tears from a lifetime ago. "Miss Clara," Sterling rasped, his voice barely a breath. It was the whisper of a name that held a universe of meaning. Clara moved forward, her steps measured, her heart a fragile bird fluttering in her chest. She saw his hand, thin and papery, trembling slightly on the sheet. It was a hand that had signed billions, but now it seemed impossibly delicate, almost childlike. As she approached, he slowly, painstakingly lifted it a fraction. Then the moment landed. Not like a crash, but like a whisper that reverberated through the very core of her being. Sterling Thorne, the titan, the unreachable, the man who had always maintained an impenetrable barrier of wealth and status, reached out. His fingers, cool and fragile, brushed against hers. It was a feather-light touch, yet it felt like an electric current, sending a jolt through Clara. Her own hand, calloused and warm from years of tending, instinctively closed around his. The sensation was profoundly intimate, a shocking reversal of their lifelong dynamic. For so long, her hands had served his family, tidied his homes, nurtured his children. But this touch was different.
It was a plea, a desperate clinging, an acknowledgment that in his final moments, stripped of everything, she was the only one he truly sought. In that instant, a dam within Clara threatened to break. She saw not the powerful billionaire, but the lonely little boy who used to cling to her skirt, the vulnerable teenager who sought her counsel, the troubled young man navigating a demanding world. The years of polite distance, the professional veneer, the unspoken pains, they all dissolved. A wave of profound, complicated emotion washed over her, sorrow for the lost years, a flicker of old affection, and a sudden, aching understanding of the depth of his final loneliness. His grip, though weak, tightened slightly on her hand, a silent anchor in his tumultuous final journey.
She looked into his eyes and saw not just fear, but a flicker of something she hadn't seen in decades. The unguarded soul of the young Sterling, reaching for comfort. It was the emotional core of their story, raw and exposed, a silent question passing between them. Do you remember? Can you forgive? Clara simply held his hand. Her lips parted, but no words came. Words felt inadequate, clumsy in the face of such profound vulnerability. Her presence, her touch, had to be enough. And in the quiet understanding that passed between them, both knew that something fundamental, something deeply buried, had just been irrevocably altered. The past, long sealed away, was now irrevocably open. Have you ever experienced a moment where a simple touch or glance conveyed more than words ever could? Tell us about it in the comments. The fragile intimacy of Sterling's touch shattered the meticulously constructed walls around Clara's heart. But the debris of decades-old hurts and societal realities quickly began to fall back into place. As his grip, a mere thread of strength, finally loosened and his eyes fluttered closed in a moment of exhaustion, Clara gently withdrew her hand. The warmth of his skin lingered on hers, a ghost of a connection that felt both profound and deeply unsettling. She stepped back, a subtle, almost imperceptible retreat that mirrored the internal battle raging within her. Her mind, usually a quiet harbor, was now a tempest. Why now? The question echoed, sharp and insistent. Why, after a lifetime of polite distance, of being quietly dismissed once her usefulness as a direct caregiver to the younger Sterling had passed, did he seek her out on his deathbed? Was it genuine remorse, a desperate attempt to absolve himself? Or was it merely the selfish whim of a dying man, seeking comfort from the one person who had truly offered him unconditional care in his formative years, without ever truly seeing her as an equal? As she stood beside the bed, still bathed in the unsettling quiet of the opulent room, the nurse, Sarah, approached cautiously. "Miss Johnson, are you all right?" she whispered, her gaze sympathetic yet professional. Clara simply nodded, unable to vocalize the turmoil. "Yes, darlin', just a lot to take in." She glanced at Sterling's pale, sleeping face. The vulnerability she had witnessed moments ago was now obscured by the mask of unconsciousness, allowing her to put her own emotional defenses back up. Just then, the door swung open with a soft click, and Bryce and Tiffany entered, their expressions of feigned concern and thinly veiled suspicion. Tiffany's perfect eyebrows arched as she took in Clara's presence beside the bed. "Ah, Miss Johnson," Bryce said, his voice smooth but edged with condescension. "Nurse Sarah mentioned you'd arrived. Rather unexpected." He gestured vaguely at the empty space where Clara's hand had been. "Dad's whims can be quite peculiar in his state." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Your father asked for me, Mr. Thorne." Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of decades of quiet dignity. She had watched Bryce grow from a demanding toddler into this entitled man, and she felt no need to justify herself to him. Tiffany, ever the less subtle, sidled up.
Yes, well, we're all very busy, Miss Johnson. The arrangements, you understand. Dad's affairs are quite complex. He wouldn't want you to be inconvenienced. Her tone implied that Clara's presence was an inconvenience, an unwanted complication in their carefully orchestrated inheritance. The implicit message was clear. You are the maid. Know your place. Don't interfere. It was the same unspoken pressure that had driven a wedge between Sterling and her all those years ago. Clara felt a familiar sting, a quiet defiance rising within her. Part of her wanted to turn and leave, to protect herself from the emotional manipulation and the condescending reminders of her station. She had endured enough of the Thorns' casual disregard for her humanity in the past. To expose herself to it now, in what should have been a moment of shared human vulnerability, felt like an unacceptable violation. But then she looked at Sterling again. He stirred faintly, a soft moan escaping his lips. And in that sound she heard not the billionaire, but the lost little boy again. The same boy who, during his parents' frequent absences, would wake from nightmares and seek her comfort, burying his face in her shoulder. The boy who was often more alone in his mansion than any child should be. That memory, sharp and poignant, battled with her rising indignation.
External pressure also mounted. Sarah, the nurse, stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne has stabilized since Miss Johnson arrived, Mr. Bryce. His vitals are stronger, and he seems more peaceful." She glanced meaningfully at Clara. "The doctors believe her presence is beneficial." Bryce exchanged a look with Tiffany, annoyance flickering in his eyes. The last thing they needed was anything complicating their father's wishes, especially if it prolonged his conscious state and, God forbid, led to any last-minute amendments to the will that might divert funds. Yet, to openly object to a dying man's comfort, especially one deemed medically beneficial, would look bad. Very bad. "Very well," Bryce conceded, though his jaw was tight. "But perhaps we can discuss what exactly Dad requires from you, Miss Johnson, in a more formal setting." The implication of a contractual agreement, of payment for her services, was clear. It was their way of trying to re-establish the old boundaries, to reduce her to her former role, to make her presence transactional and controllable. Clara simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She felt the internal struggle intensify. Her pride screamed for her to walk away, to protect the dignity she had painstakingly built for herself and her family. But another part, a deeper, more compassionate part, resonated with the profound vulnerability she had witnessed in Sterling's eyes. He was dying, and for whatever complicated, unspoken reasons, he had called for her. To abandon him now felt un-Clara-like. It felt like abandoning that lonely boy who had once depended on her so completely. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent standoff. Clara knew that staying meant facing not only Sterling's unresolved past, but also the Thorns' continued attempts to diminish her. Yet the desperate plea in Sterling's eyes, the faint memory of a boy who had needed her, held her tethered. She wouldn't walk away. Not yet. She would stay, but on her own terms, guarding her heart even as she opened a small corner of it to the dying man. The true meaning of his wish and the cost of fulfilling it still lay hidden beneath layers of resentment, regret, and the rigid structures of class. Have you ever had to resist the urge to walk away from a difficult situation, knowing deep down that staying was the right thing to do? Share your experience below. The next few days settled into a tense, uneasy rhythm within the penthouse. Sterling Thorne's condition remained precarious, his moments of lucidity brief but insistent. And each time he stirred, his eyes would search for Clara, a silent, urgent question in their depths. The doctors, observing his marked improvement in stability when Clara was present, cautiously endorsed her continued stay.
This medical mandate, more than anything else, was what forced Bryce and Tiffany to accept her presence, albeit with thinly veiled resentment. They couldn't be seen to deny their dying father comfort, especially if it was a doctor's recommendation. Clara, despite her internal resistance, found herself spending more and more time by Sterling's bedside. The circumstances had bound them together in a cruel, intimate embrace. She couldn't leave, not when his fragile grip on her hand felt like a lifeline, not when his eyes, in rare moments, held such profound, aching need. She brought a small, worn Bible, its pages softened with age, and would sometimes read aloud in a low, comforting hum, her Jamaican accent a soothing balm in the sterile room. She didn't preach, merely read psalms or passages that spoke of comfort and peace, her voice filling the vast space with a warmth that had been absent for decades. In these hours, the opulent penthouse felt less like a monument to wealth and more like a waiting room for the inevitable. The conversations were sparse, filled with the vast, unspoken chasm of their past. But silence, in its own way, became a language. Clara would simply sit, her presence a steady anchor. She'd adjust his pillow, offer sips of water with a straw, or gently dab his brow with a cool cloth. These were the small, familiar acts of care that transcended their former roles, blurring the lines between maid and confidant, between employer and employee. One afternoon, Sterling was lucid for a sustained period. His gaze, fixed on Clara, held a profound weight. "The children," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "Bryce, Tiffany, they're not ready for the company."
Clara remained silent, her expression unreadable. She knew this truth better than anyone. She had seen their wastefulness, their detachment, their insatiable appetites for fleeting pleasures. She had also seen Michael, her son, quietly poring over complex financial reports, his insights sharp and prescient, sometimes indirectly solving problems for Sterling's company without ever knowing the full scope. "My legacy," Sterling continued, a flicker of his old power returning to his eyes, quickly extinguished by weakness. "It will crumble. They will squander it." A single tear, the first Clara had seen him shed since he was a child, tracked a path down his gaunt cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity for his impending death, but for the demise of his life's work, the monument he had built with such ruthless dedication. Clara reached out, gently wiping the tear with her thumb. It was an instinctive, maternal gesture, born of a lifetime of nurturing. "A man's legacy, Mr. Thorne," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet wisdom, "is not only in what he builds, but in what he leaves behind that truly matters." She paused, her gaze holding his. "And sometimes, what matters most is not the fortune, but the love." Sterling's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then understanding. Her words resonated with a truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time in perhaps 50 years. He saw not the old black maid, but Clara, the woman who had filled the gaping void of his lonely childhood with warmth and genuine affection. He saw the quiet strength, the unwavering dignity, the unspoken wisdom. And in that moment, a profound, almost unbearable regret washed over him. He had chosen empire over connection, power over love, and now, at the very end, he faced the devastating cost of that choice. He tried to speak, but only a choked sound escaped his lips. His hand, still weak, fumbled, searching for hers. Clara gently took it, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent promise of presence. The forced proximity had begun to chip away at the hardened layers of both their hearts, revealing the raw, aching core of their shared history. The barrier that had stood between them for decades, built of class, race, and unspoken resentments, was slowly, painfully dissolving in the face of his dying wish and her quiet, unwavering compassion. They were not just employer and employee, but two souls bound by a profound, if complicated past, now desperately seeking a bridge to connect before time ran out. Sometimes the most profound truths are spoken not through grand gestures, but in quiet moments of vulnerability. What truth have you realized in an unexpected situation? Share it in the comments below. The dam had broken. Sterling's brief yet profoundly vulnerable confession about his children and his legacy had opened a portal to a past both of them had meticulously sealed away. In the days that followed, fueled by the encroaching shadows of his final hours, Sterling began to speak more, his voice gaining a fragile strength whenever Clara was near. His words were often fragmented, punctuated by long pauses for breath, but each utterance was a precious piece of a puzzle, slowly reconstructing the story of their shared history. He spoke of his childhood, not with the detached pride of a man recalling triumphs, but with the raw ache of a lonely boy. "They were always so busy," he'd whisper, his eyes distant, fixed on a point only he could see. "My father, the market was his life. My mother, her social calendar. I was another asset to manage." Clara listened, her heart aching with a familiar sorrow. She remembered the vast, echoing silence of the Thorne mansion, often filled only by the distant clatter of servants and the insistent ringing of telephones that were never for young Sterling. She remembered finding him, a small boy hunched over complex financial newspapers, trying to understand a world his parents inhabited but never shared with him. "You were always there," Sterling continued, a faint smile tinged with profound regret touching his lips. "The smell of your cooking, the sound of your humming, it was home." He recounted vivid vignettes, Clara teaching him to tie his shoelaces when his mother was too busy, her quiet comfort after a particularly harsh scolding from his father, the clandestine trips to the kitchen for a piece of her special rum cake, a small rebellion against the rigid formality of his upbringing. He remembered a time when he had a high fever, and it was Clara, not his mother, who sat by his bedside all night, gently stroking his hair, singing softly in her melodic Jamaican accent until he fell asleep. It was the only time he felt truly safe, truly loved.
One afternoon, Sterling reached under his pillow, his hand fumbling. I want you to have this," he managed, his breathing labored. He produced a small, tarnished silver locket, its surface dulled with age. Clara took it, her fingers tracing the intricate engraving of an oak tree on its face. It was undeniably old, a relic from a time before the Thornes' current sterile opulence. "What is this, Mr. Thorne?" she asked softly. "My mother's," he whispered. "She gave it to me, before she became too busy. You wore it for a while, when I was small. I remember." Clara's breath hitched. She remembered the locket. It was during a particularly difficult period for young Sterling, when his parents were abroad for months, and she had worn it around her neck, a small token of comfort and connection to his absent mother. She had returned it to him the day his parents came back, carefully placing it in his small hand. The fact that he still possessed it, that he remembered her wearing it, was a revelation. It spoke of a depth of attachment she hadn't realized he carried. But then the painful clues began to surface, pieces of her own memory aligning with his fragmented recollections. She remembered the subtle shift in Sterling as he entered adolescence. His father, a formidable and emotionally distant man, had begun to pull him away, grooming him for the empire. "Thorne men don't waste time with sentiment," his father had declared more than once, his words a cold hammer striking at the tender bonds Sterling had formed with Clara. She remembered the day Sterling stopped calling her Miss Clara and started addressing her simply as Clara, his tone more formal, more distant. She remembered the way he stopped seeking her out, his eyes increasingly mirroring his father's cold ambition. There was one particularly painful memory, a day when young Sterling, perhaps 16, had defended her against a casual racist remark made by a visiting relative. He had been fierce, protective, but his father had overheard, and later Sterling had been subjected to a harsh public dressing down, humiliated and told that such attachments were weaknesses. After that, he seemed to retreat, building an emotional fortress around himself. The distance grew, painful and palpable, until she was simply the maid once more, her warmth replaced by professional courtesy, her affection by unspoken duty.
I let him, Sterling confessed, his voice filled with self-loathing, referring to his father. I let him take you away. I was afraid of being weak, afraid of losing everything. He closed his eyes, a tear escaping. I lost you instead. The admission hung heavy in the air, a raw wound finally exposed. The mystery of their estrangement intensified, deepening their connection, even as it brought the sting of past pain to the surface. Clara realized that his distance wasn't born of malice, but of a profound learned fear, instilled by a father who equated emotion with weakness. Her heart ached for the boy he was, trapped by the expectations of his legacy. The locket felt heavy in her hand, a tangible link to a love that had been fractured but never truly broken. The weight of hidden truths was finally being lifted, and the possibility of healing, of true reconciliation, however late, glimmered in the sterile room. Sometimes the people we push away are the ones who loved us most genuinely. Have you ever realized a past mistake or understood someone's actions years later? Share your story in the comments. With these revelations, the sterile atmosphere of Sterling's penthouse began to subtly change. The unspoken wall between Sterling and Clara, once an impenetrable barrier, had crumbled, replaced by a delicate yet resilient bridge built of shared memories and raw confessions. The air now felt charged not with tension, but with a profound, quiet intimacy. Sterling, emboldened by Clara's unwavering presence and her silent understanding, started to truly open up. He didn't just recount memories, he confessed the profound loneliness that had plagued him even amidst his vast success. I built this, he gestured weakly around the opulent room, but I built it alone. No one to share it with, not truly. He spoke of the hollow victories, the endless pursuit of more, and the terrifying realization, in his final years, that he had sacrificed his soul for the empire. The locket felt heavy in her hand, a tangible link to a love that had been fractured but never truly broken. The weight of hidden truths was finally being lifted, and the possibility of healing, of true reconciliation, however late, glimmered in the sterile room. Sometimes the people we push away are the ones who loved us most genuinely. Have you ever realized a past mistake or understood someone's actions years later? Share your story in the comments. With these revelations, the sterile atmosphere of Sterling's penthouse began to subtly change. The unspoken wall between Sterling and Clara, once an impenetrable barrier, had crumbled, replaced by a delicate yet resilient bridge built of shared memories and raw confessions. The air now felt charged not with tension, but with a profound, quiet intimacy. Sterling, emboldened by Clara's unwavering presence and her silent understanding, started to truly open up. He didn't just recount memories, he confessed the profound loneliness that had plagued him even amidst his vast success. I built this, he gestured weakly around the opulent room, but I built it alone. No one to share it with, not truly. He spoke of the hollow victories, the endless pursuit of more, and the terrifying realization in his final years that he had sacrificed his soul for the empire.
Clara, in turn, began to share her own perspective, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, maternal sadness. She spoke of the pain of watching him drift away, of feeling her love, which she had poured into him as a child, slowly become irrelevant in his adult life. It was like watching a bird you raised fly away, she murmured one afternoon, her gaze fixed on the cityscape outside. You wish them well, but you miss the song. She also spoke of the quiet pride she felt when she heard of his successes, a pride often mixed with concern for the man she knew he could be, beyond the ruthless businessman. They began to find moments of shared vulnerability that transcended their past roles. Sterling, recalling Clara's soothing touch from his childhood fever, often asked her to simply hold his hand, not as a dying man needing comfort, but as a boy seeking reassurance.
He recounted a specific instance when, as a young man grappling with an impossible business decision that threatened his fledgling company, he had quietly sought his mother's advice. His mother, however, had simply dismissed his concerns as unmanly and told him to be a thorn. Later, he vividly remembered Clara, overhearing his distress, coming into the kitchen where he paced. She didn't offer business advice, but simply brewed him a cup of her strong Jamaican ginger tea and sat with him in silence, occasionally murmuring, "Troubles come like waves, Sterling, but every wave eventually breaks on the shore. Just hold steady." He never forgot that quiet moment of human connection that calmed him more than any harsh business lecture. Clara, too, shared a glimpse into her own life after leaving the Thorns, speaking of the joy of watching her own children flourish, especially Michael, her bright, dedicated son. Sterling listened, a flicker of something almost like envy in his eyes, realizing the rich, loving family life he had foregone. He even asked about Michael, recalling those anonymous solutions that had saved his company a considerable sum. "That boy of yours, he had a good head on his shoulders, saw things others didn't. Like you, Clara." The compliment, delivered with such unexpected sincerity, warmed Clara's heart, a belated acknowledgment of a quiet brilliance he had chosen to ignore for so long. Humor, too, found its way into their confined space. Clara, remembering Sterling's childhood penchant for mischief, gently teased him about a forgotten incident involving a stolen cookie jar and a hastily concocted alibi. Sterling, for the first time in Clara's memory, truly laughed, a soft, dry sound that seemed to chase away some of the deathbed grimness. It was a fragile but real bond, rekindled in the crucible of his final days. There was a moment one evening when the city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds outside. Sterling, unusually alert, turned his head to look at Clara. "I was a fool, wasn't I?" he murmured, his voice laced with genuine remorse. "Chasing everything, and letting go of the only thing that mattered." Clara reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "We all make our choices, Sterling, and sometimes it takes a lifetime to understand their true cost." She squeezed his hand. "But it's never too late to find peace, to make amends." It felt like healing was possible, a delicate balm being applied to wounds that had festered for decades. Their connection, forged in the fires of memory and regret, offered a fragile but profound sense of peace. For Sterling, it was the first true comfort he had felt in years, a glimpse of the unconditional love he had pushed away. For Clara, it was a quiet vindication, a belated recognition of her worth, and the profound, enduring impact she had had on the life of a man who had everything, yet possessed so little of true value. The sterile room, for a fleeting time, became a sanctuary, filled with the warmth of an unexpected, rediscovered love. But both knew, with a heavy heart, that this peace, this newfound connection, was not permanent. Time, the ultimate arbiter, was running out. Have you ever found common ground or rekindled a connection with someone after years of distance or misunderstanding? Share your story of bridging that gap. The fragile peace that had settled over Sterling's penthouse, nurtured by shared memories and burgeoning vulnerability, was destined to be fleeting. Just as their bond deepened, a harsh reality, fueled by greed and suspicion, stormed into the sanctuary of his deathbed. It was a blustery afternoon, matching the turbulence brewing within the Thorne family. Bryce and Tiffany, having grown increasingly uneasy with Clara's constant presence and Sterling's newfound lucidity, decided to confront the situation head-on.
They had observed the quiet intimacy, the unguarded expressions, and Sterling's softened demeanor, all alarming signs for children who feared any deviation from the established will. They burst into the room, not with the quiet respect they usually feigned, but with an air of barely contained fury. Tiffany's voice, usually a light, social hum, was now sharp and accusing. "What exactly are your intentions, Miss Johnson?" she demanded, her eyes narrowed.
Spending all this time with our father, it's highly unusual and frankly suspicious." Bryce, ever the calculating one, stepped closer, his voice low but menacing. "Let's be clear, my father is in a compromised state. Any attempts to influence him regarding his estate will be met with severe legal repercussions. We know about these things, Miss Johnson. We know how people try to take advantage." He gestured vaguely towards the expensive medical equipment. "This isn't some charity ward. This is Thorne Industries' legacy you're dabbling with." The words, dripping with contempt and thinly veiled racism, struck Clara like a physical blow. The unspoken boundaries, the reminders of her station, the casual dismissal of her humanity, all the old hurts that she thought had been buried now resurfaced with brutal force. Her quiet dignity, usually her armor, now felt like a target. She felt the familiar sting of being reduced, once again, to just the maid, a cunning opportunist in their eyes, rather than a woman who had given a lifetime of loyal service, a woman who genuinely cared for their dying father. "My intentions," Clara stated, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it, "are simply to offer comfort to a dying man who asked for me, nothing more." "Comfort?" Tiffany scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Or a last-minute play for a bigger piece of the pie? We've seen it before. The vulnerable old man, the loyal servant." The insinuation hung heavy in the air, a poisonous cloud. Sterling, who had been weakly stirring, heard their words. His eyes, now open, darted between his children and Clara, a look of profound distress on his face. He tried to speak, to defend her, to assert his will, but only a choked, rattling gasp escaped his lips. His weakened body betrayed him, unable to articulate the truth that screamed in his mind. Seeing his distress, Bryce pressed on, interpreting Sterling's silence as agreement, or perhaps fear. "We understand you might have helped Dad with some trivial matters in the past, Miss Johnson. Even your son, the economics graduate," he sneered, "might have offered some unsolicited advice. But this is different. This is about the future of Thorne Industries." He paused, leaning in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We will ensure that you and your family receive nothing beyond what was already generously provided upon your retirement. Do you understand?" Harsh words. The implication that her son Michael's genuine, if indirect, contributions were just unsolicited advice and trivial matters was a direct affront to her family's integrity. The accusation that she was a schemer, a gold digger, aimed at exploiting a dying man, tore at her soul. The bond, so painstakingly built over the past few days, felt utterly destroyed, pulverized by their cruelty and suspicion. Clara felt a furious heat rise within her, battling with an overwhelming sense of despair. She looked at Sterling, lying there, helpless, unable to defend her, his eyes filled with a desperate apology. It was the same helpless look he'd had as a child when his father had belittled his affections. This time, however, he was the powerful man, yet still powerless to protect her from the very forces he had succumbed to in his youth. The realization was devastating. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Thorne," Clara said, her voice now dangerously calm, devoid of all warmth. She pulled her hand away from Sterling's, her touch deliberate, final. "I understand that some things never change." Her eyes, usually so full of kindness, now held a deep, reflective hurt, seeing not just Bryce and Tiffany, but the shadow of the man Sterling himself had once become. With a profound sense of anguish, she turned and walked towards the door. She didn't look back. The bond was shattered. The promise of healing, the fragile connection they had forged, seemed utterly destroyed. As the door closed behind her, leaving Sterling alone with his children's cold calculations, Clara felt a crushing weight. She questioned if she had been foolish to hope, to open her heart. She questioned if she, an old maid, a woman from a different world, was ever truly worthy of such a connection, or if she was destined to always be simply a tool, a forgotten comfort, discarded when no longer needed.
The lowest emotional point had arrived, leaving behind only the bitter taste of betrayal and the chilling realization that some wounds were too deep to heal. Have you ever experienced a moment where harsh words or unjust accusations completely shattered a fragile connection you were building? How did it make you feel? Share your thoughts below. The silence in Clara's modest Queen's home was a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of Sterling's penthouse. But it was just as heavy, perhaps even heavier, laden with the weight of shattered hope and rekindled pain. She sat in her worn armchair, the silver locket Sterling had given her clutched tightly in her hand. The accusations of Bryce and Tiffany still echoed in her mind, stinging like fresh wounds. Opportunist, schemer, taking advantage. The words cut deep, not just because they were false, but because they reminded her of a lifetime of being underestimated, of having her dignity quietly chipped away by those who held power. Her initial fury had given way to a profound sense of weariness, a deep exhaustion that settled into her bones. Was she foolish to have gone, to have opened a door to a past she had meticulously closed? Her children, Michael and her daughter Simone, had expressed their concern when she first left, fearing she would be hurt. Michael, with his keen understanding of the world, had even warned her about the Thorns' potential reactions. Now, sitting alone, she felt a bitter vindication in their foresight and a quiet shame in her own renewed vulnerability. She looked at the locket, turning it over in her trembling fingers. It was a tangible link to a different Sterling, a vulnerable boy who had needed her. But that boy was now a dying man, seemingly powerless to protect her from his own family's contempt. Should she simply retreat, nurse her wounds, and let the old man die in the cold comfort of his wealth, surrounded by those who valued only his money? Her pride, bruised and battered, urged her to do just that. It whispered of self-preservation, of protecting the peace she had found in her own life, away from the Thorns' toxic influence. But then another image surfaced, Sterling's eyes, filled with that desperate, silent apology as his children tore into her. The single tear that had traced a path down his cheek when he confessed his loneliness. The raw regret in his voice as he admitted to letting his father drive her away. He wasn't just a rich man, he was a man facing the ultimate reckoning, stripped of all pretense, desperately seeking a final human connection. To abandon him now felt like a betrayal, not of the powerful billionaire, but of the lonely boy who had once depended on her for warmth and affection. Could she truly deny him that final comfort, that last chance at reconciliation, simply to protect her own hurt pride? The choice gnawed at her, vengeance of spirit or profound compassion, avoidance of further pain or the courageous, difficult path of forgiveness, both for him and, in a way, for herself. The night stretched long, filled with the quiet battle between her wounded heart and her unshakable moral compass. Meanwhile, in the sterile grandeur of his penthouse, Sterling Thorn lay consumed by a despair colder than any air conditioning system could produce. Clara's departure had left a gaping void, a sudden, brutal return to the profound loneliness he had spent a lifetime trying to ignore. His children, having successfully driven her away, now hovered with an air of satisfaction, believing they had protected their inheritance. But for Sterling, their victory was his ultimate defeat. He replayed Clara's final words, "I understand that some things never change," and her deliberate withdrawal of her hand. The image haunted him, a searing indictment of his life, a testament to the emotional wasteland he had cultivated. He was dying, not just physically, but emotionally, drowning in a sea of regret.
He had sacrificed everything for an empire that now seemed meaningless, surrounded by children who valued him only for his assets, and he had pushed away the only person who had ever offered him genuine, unconditional love. He thought of Michael, Clara's son. He remembered those subtle, brilliant suggestions Clara had sometimes relayed, solving intractable problems within Thorne Industries. He knew, deep down, that Michael's mind was sharper, his character more solid, his values more aligned with the true spirit of creation and legacy than either Bryce or Tiffany. Yet he had never acknowledged it, never offered an opportunity, blinded by his own prejudices and the rigid class structure he had upheld.
He had allowed his children, those grasping extensions of his own detached self, to humiliate the very woman he sought for solace. The shame was suffocating. He had once again failed to protect her, just as he had failed to protect his own heart from his father's corrosive influence. This wasn't just about his will anymore, it was about his soul. Could he die with this crushing weight of regret, this profound sense of having missed the very essence of human connection? He needed to make amends. Not with money, that felt too crude, too transactional, but with truth, with genuine acknowledgement, with a final, heartfelt plea for forgiveness. He knew he didn't have much time. He beckoned for Nurse Sarah, his voice weak but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah, a pen, paper. He needed to write. Not a formal document for his lawyers, but a personal message, a final desperate reach across the chasm he had helped create. It was his last excruciating choice, to die a lonely, unrepentant titan, or to take one final, vulnerable step towards the unexpected love he had long denied. In moments of profound crisis, we often find clarity about what truly matters. What difficult choice have you faced that revealed your deepest values? Share your story below. The first rays of dawn were painting the Queen's sky in hues of soft pink and gold when the knock came at Clara's door. She had spent a sleepless night, wrestling with her conscience, the locket still clutched in her hand. Her internal battle had raged, but by morning a quiet resolve had settled within her. She would go back. Not for Sterling Thorne, the billionaire, but for the lonely boy she had once nurtured, the dying man now facing his final moments with nothing but regret. Her heart, though bruised, simply wouldn't allow her to do otherwise. Compassion, she realized, was a stronger force than pride. It was Nurse Sarah at the door, her face etched with exhaustion but also relief. "Miss Johnson," she began, her voice hushed. "Mr. Thorne, he's weaker, but he asked me to deliver this. He waited all night for me to bring it to you." She handed Clara a folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper. Clara took the note, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. Sterling's handwriting, usually bold and commanding, was now shaky, barely legible, a testament to his fading strength. The note read, "My dearest Clara, I am a fool, a proud, blind fool. They were wrong. You were never after anything but my heart, and I, in my cowardice, pushed it away. I failed you, and I failed myself. Please, come back, not as a maid, but as the only family that ever truly saw me. And tell Michael, tell him I know, I always knew. Forgive me, Clara. Forgive this lost boy." A single tear tracked down Clara's cheek, but this time it was a tear of profound sorrow mixed with a quiet, overwhelming understanding. He knew. He had always known Michael's worth, and by extension, hers. The confession, raw and unadorned, was the apology she hadn't realized she desperately needed. It was an acknowledgement that transcended money, status, or prejudice. It was a man, at the very precipice of eternity, finally seeing and validating her humanity and that of her son. Without a word, Clara turned and grabbed her worn handbag. "Let's go, darlin'," she said to Sarah, her voice firm, resolute. "He's waiting." Back in the penthouse, the atmosphere was different. Bryce and Tiffany were absent.
having been discreetly but firmly asked to leave by Sarah, following a cryptic instruction left by Sterling. They were seething, but ultimately they were powerless against the medical and legal team ensuring Sterling's final wishes were met, however unorthodox. Clara entered the room, her heart a drum against her ribs. Sterling was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. His eyes, though mostly closed, fluttered open as he sensed her presence. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips when he saw her. Clara sat beside him, taking his frail hand in hers once more. This time there was no resistance, no hesitation. She held it with a tenderness born of a lifetime of nurturing. "I'm here, Sterling," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm here." Sterling's eyes, clouded with approaching death, seemed to clear for a moment. He looked at her, then at the locket, still clutched in her other hand. He managed to lift his hand, pointing faintly to it, then to her. A silent communication passed between them, a shared memory of a different time, a recognition of a love that had always been present, if sometimes unacknowledged.
"Thank you," he mouthed, his voice a ghost of a sound. "Clara." He closed his eyes, a look of profound peace settling over his face. His grip on her hand, though fleeting, conveyed more than any billion-dollar speech ever could. And then, with a final, shallow breath, Sterling Thorne, the titan of industry, the lonely boy, passed away, his hand held firmly in the comforting, familiar grasp of Clara Johnson. Clara stayed there for a long time, holding his hand, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors slowly dissolving into a flat, continuous line. The room, once a mausoleum of marble and glass, now felt imbued with a strange, bitter-sweet warmth. She had given him the peace he had sought, and in doing so, she had found her own. In the weeks that followed, the legal intricacies of Sterling Thorne's will were revealed. Bryce and Tiffany were indeed left with a significant inheritance, enough to sustain their lavish lifestyles. But the vast majority of Thorne Industries, to their shock and outrage, had been placed in a trust with strict conditions. A final, crucial codicil, handwritten by Sterling just hours before his death and witnessed by Sarah, designated Clara's son, Michael Johnson, as a key advisor to the trust, with a significant role in guiding the company's future until a new, worthy CEO could be found. It was a final, undeniable validation of Michael's acumen and, more profoundly, a testament to Sterling's ultimate acknowledgement of true merit over bloodline. Clara, her heart lighter but still carrying the echo of their shared journey, continued her life in Queens. She didn't seek the spotlight or the praise. She found her victory not in wealth, but in the profound, unexpected reunion of two souls, in the quiet forgiveness she offered, and in the belated but powerful recognition of her and her son's true worth. The locket became a cherished heirloom, a tangible reminder that genuine connection, profound love, and the quiet dignity of a life well lived ultimately trumped all the riches in the world. Sterling Thorne's last dying wish hadn't just changed everything for him. It had, in its own quiet, profound way, completed Clara's own narrative, leaving her with a legacy of love found at last, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart. What do you think is the most impactful way to make amends or leave a meaningful legacy in your final days? Share your thoughts and reflections below.